Good to be here on Darking Young and Gurungai land. I noticed as I walked in that I had sand on my shoes, and I thought about washing it off. I thought, you know what, I'm going to keep it on. It's so beautiful here, and I want to bring a piece of it with me here on stage. But we're here to talk about Kath Koschel. She's the founder of the Kindness Factory, a global not-for-profit and a movement to inspire ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Just give a little bit of a round of applause for Kath, just to welcome her here. And I'm going to preface this discussion today, just so you all know, we're going to cover some difficult topics. There'll be discussion about traumatic injury, suicide, and we're going to do our best to treat those topics with sensitivity, but if you feel you need to step out, please do so knowing we support you. Kath, you have been many things, right? You've been a professional cricketer, an Ironman competitor. You have experienced several extremely traumatic injuries and difficult recoveries. And now you're a professional motivational speaker, right? Your book, Kindness, begins in 2016 when you made a decision to take a risk. So I'm just going to invite you to read the first paragraph of the introduction to your book to set the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do, just it's lovely to see so many faces in the audience. If anyone hasn't seen the cover of my book, it looks like that. And I feel like with this cushion behind me, I'm matching the cover of my book, which is my first point. But lovely to meet you all, and I look forward to having a conversation with everyone at the end as well. So the first little bit of my book reads like this. In August of 2016, I set off on a journey around Australia with nothing but the clothes on my back and my phone. No cash, no credit card, food or water. In order to survive, I would have to accept the help and kindness of strangers. I had no idea how long I would last, but I did know that it was going to be either the best or the worst decision of my life. It's a lot to consider.
So how are you feeling about that decision now?
To answer, I guess, that last little sentence, it was easily the best decision of my life up until that point in my life. I think I learnt more about myself in that 2-month journey that I ended up lasting than I have the rest of my life combined. So it was an incredible pivot in life direction at that point. All I remember prior to leaving was feeling incredibly lost with where my life had taken me to that point, the adversities that I'd endured and the life circumstances that I was almost forced to confront head on and overcome. And at the end of that journey, life made sense again. And I think that is the power of kindness, and it's also the power of human connection. And I think both coexist together quite nicely, or that's what I learnt in that 2 months on the road for sure.
And the decision to take that step, take that leap, didn't come from nowhere. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a bit about your state of mind at the time and, in your own words, like how you got to that point?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I think I was 28 when I left for that journey, 29 I think I was. Up until the age of 24, I had no adversity to speak of. I'm so privileged in terms of my upbringing. I had a beautiful family, a mum and dad who cared about me. I've got 3 older brothers. I've spent a lot of my time in country and regional New South Wales. I was privileged enough to have a good education. So no adversity to speak of until the age of 24, when I first broke my back for the first time. So playing cricket, a very freak accident, left me diagnosed as a paraplegic, got told I'd never walk again. That journey led to a 12-month stint in rehab to teach myself how to walk. And whilst there, fell in love with a fellow patient, which is a little bit funny because who finds love in a rehab centre? I did, and it was pretty amazing. And I guess what made our time more bearable in rehab was dreaming a life that would exist once we finished rehab. So when you're in the grind of teaching yourself how to walk again, it's no mean feat, and it's bloody tough. No ifs and whats about that. So to have found love in that environment was a huge surprise, and I actually almost remember feeling grateful to have broken my back, to have found love, and for that to exist in that environment was a pretty special feeling for me. And we just dreamed of a life that would exist once we'd finished rehab. So what's the carrot we can dangle in front of ourselves so that when we're through this, we have something to look forward to in terms of the life that we can build together, and we can be proud of where we've come from, how we met, and what we endured and overcame. And for us, those dreams were pretty amazing. They looked like 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl, just like my family. A house in Broadwater on the Gold Coast, pet turtles, dogs, you name it. We sort of dreamt it. But unfortunately for all of us, for the world, for myself included, his name Jim, he passed away on his last night of rehab when we were due to start this life together via suicide. And as a 24-year-old, that just leaves your whole world shattered, on top of the endurance of having to learn how to walk again, and a broken back, and a loss of identity of being an athlete. And I just lost every part of myself throughout the grief period that followed. That then led to a kindness movement, and a lot of people ask, how does grief, trauma, loss equate to kindness? When you're in a wheelchair like I have been and you can't reach a lift button, and a stranger walks past and sees that struggle, and they press that button for you, and it means nothing to their day but everything to yours. Those moments I found throughout my toughest periods in life so powerful, and that's what inspired me to create the movement of kindness. Fast forward to recovery and learning how to walk again, and recovering somewhat of the loss of my partner, I got into triathlons because that made a whole lot of sense. It didn't at all. And I got quite good at triathlon, and it gave me a sense of purpose. And whilst working full-time in sport and starting the movement of Kindness Factory and things like that, I was training for an Ironman. And on a training bike ride with my best friend, I got hit by a drunk driver and broke my back again. In 4 places, I shattered my hip, broke my wrist, dislocated my neck, and woke up from a coma a couple of weeks later to the news that I was paralysed and told that I wouldn't walk again for the second time in my life. So you go through rehab again, and the scars of the first time, it's incredibly tough, as you can imagine. And again, I guess the world started to show up for me through kindness. So people were saying, look, I've heard of your injury, I wanted to spur you on, I wanted to let you know today I mowed my neighbour's lawn, or I donated blood. Some people donated kidneys. They were doing these acts of kindness and sending them to me to inspire my recovery, which I found to be just incredibly powerful again. I don't think any of us can argue with the power of kindness. And so with that, I guess my recovery began. And it was actually what led to this decision was a feeling of me sort of starting to slide back down into a little bit of helplessness, and a feeling of, as I mentioned, being quite lost. But the pivotal moment that really turned it around was actually I had to face the man who hit me with his car in court. And I've never been in trouble with the law. It was a 3-day process. I'd never been into a courtroom. And I was there with my dad, who was a police officer for 40 years. And we're in court, and on the last day, all of these criminal charges are handed out to the man who'd hit me with his car. And for the entire process, to keep myself there, I had to keep reminding myself, this man didn't intentionally hurt me. He didn't mean to set out and ruin my life or anything like that. And I had to keep that in the front of my mind. He'd made a big mistake. I make 10 of them a day. Luckily, none of mine have changed the course of someone's life. And as he broke down in tears when all of the verdicts are handed out, I was still very, I live with a permanent disability, so I was walking very gingerly. And I remember going over to him feeling a little bit of empathy, knowing that he hadn't intentionally harmed me. And I put my hand on his shoulder. He was on the floor by this point, and I said, mate, are you okay? And he said to me, no, I'm not. And I said, I can see that. I'm sorry to see that you're having a bad day. And he said, okay. And I said, look, how are you getting home today? And he said, I don't know, I can't afford a taxi. And my dad was off my shoulder. He's a pretty unique character, and I could see him shaking his head going, don't you do this? And I said, look, we'll give you a lift home. And he looked up at me, and I'll never forget it, and he said, I don't think that's a very good idea. And Dad said, Kath, that is definitely not a very good idea. But we did. We gave this man a lift home. It was a 15-minute journey, and you could have heard a pin drop, silence the entire way. And as he goes to get out of the car, he never once said thanks for the ride or sorry or anything like that. And the door's shutting, and then it just stops. And he looks at me. I was in the back. He was in the front. Dad was driving. And he said to me, why did you just do that? And I said, before I could even think, I said, because your actions don't control mine. I would have done that for any other person on the planet. I'm not going to let your behaviour change the person who I am. So he gets out, and I have to face the wrath of my dad then. So I jump in the front, and my dad is the toughest man I've ever known. I love him dearly. Always been a role model in my life. And as I mentioned, he was a cop for 40 years. The last 10 years of his career, he was at King's Cross. So the man's seen some pretty heavy stuff. And as we're sort of sitting there, I'm waiting for my dad to start driving, and engine's running, and I just sat still. Oh, what's going on? I turned like that to look at my dad. He just had tears running down his face. And I said, Dad, what's wrong? And he said, mate, before I go on, let me tell you how proud your mum and I are of you. But it is so bloody hard to be your parents sometimes. I said, I know, Dad. And he said, Kath, I need you to explain this to me. I've literally had to watch you crawl through life. Like, I literally watched you crawl because you couldn't walk at one point. And that man who I've just given a lift home to is responsible for that. Why did we just do this? Can you explain that to me? And I said, yeah, Dad, I can. I said, at a young age, actually, you gave me a poster and it had a quote on it. Do you remember this? And he said, I do. It's still in your bedroom. I said, do you remember what it read? And he said, no. I said, it simply reads that the world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. He said, that's right. And I said, do you mind me asking, Dad, why did you give that to me? He said, Kath, I hate to break it to you, mate. I'm pretty sure I got it for free at work. And I said, well, Dad, that meant something to me, but thanks for ruining a lifelong learning. And here's my rationale that I gave to my dad, which fits for everyone because it's true. I said, I'm so sick of turning on the TV, going onto social media, whatever means it is that we're consuming information from. And as human beings, we see hate, call it bullying, domestic violence, gun violence, war, terrorism. These are completely man-made adversities. Life is bloody hard. We go through trauma, we go through loss, natural disasters, cancer diagnosis. Life is hard at the best of times for each and every single one of us. Why is there so much unnecessary hate? It makes no sense to me. With that quote in mind, I didn't want to see hate and respond with hate. Somewhere along the line, it needs to be broken in my view. And so I said, you know what? Kindness has saved my life once. Why can't it again? And that's what led to me then going, I'm going to test this in the most boldest of experiments. I'm going to leave my home with nothing but the clothes on my back. And I genuinely think that this will work. Dad attached a GPS tracker to my backpack. Made sure all those things were covered off on and checked in on the daily on the phone. But it was honestly mind-blowing. But I guess what led to feeling incredibly lost, it truly meant the world to me. And the people that I met just reaffirmed to me what I already believed, that kindness is the most powerful, underrated and underutilised agent of human change that we as human beings have. I think the greatest responsibility, the greatest privilege and responsibility about being alive right now is understanding that every single interaction that we hold with another person, regardless of who they are in your life, if it's someone that you know or just the person who makes you coffee or that you walk by, every interaction that we hold with another person has an incredible opportunity to lift someone up through encouraging words, a helping hand, compliment, whatever it is, a high five, a hug, or it can have a completely opposite effect. It can really derail the course of someone's life through name-calling, shouting at someone, and the way that we behave. And understanding that really gives us that choice to act in accordance with our own values and the world that we want to see for tomorrow as well. That's a really good privilege, I think, that we all need to understand more of. So, long answer to a good question, but good yarns in the process.
No, that's perfect. It really sets the scene, I think, and give us an insight into your background, your childhood, and how much of a nightmare it is to parent you. But parenting, I'm not a parent, but like what I recognize is that you're trusting the world with your child, and what you chose to do in your journey was also to then put your trust of your needs, your life in the hands of strangers. What felt so important to you that it was strangers that you were putting that trust into?
I think to prove the point that we just sort of spoke about, it was, but also I think I've always been I'm one of 4 kids and I'm the youngest and only girl, so I've got 3 older brothers from the bush. It's a school of hard knocks kind of loved my family. It was an incredible upbringing. But I've always had this fierce need for independence, and no qualms in admitting that I am incredibly stubborn. It's not a great quality, but I understand my strengths and weaknesses well. So when harnessed well, it can lead to some really good outcomes. But one thing that I've always struggled with that need for independence, or had always struggled with, was accepting help, especially of people that I knew and all those sorts of things. In saying that, if anyone has read the book or will read the book or whatever it is, I need everyone in this room to understand that I haven't overcome the things that I have by myself. One thing I've never lacked is support networks. My family are incredible. My friends are amazing. They have never given up on me, and that is not something that I take lightly. I know that not everyone is afforded that privilege in life. So I knew they always had my back, but for whatever reason, I needed a lot of not intervention, but support to process my journey and experiences. But I had to be ready to even accept that, and even at that point, I still wasn't really ready to sit down in a confined space of a room and discuss that with even a psychologist or a mental health practitioner. For me, what I was craving the most was to feel seen, heard and valued, because all of these experiences that I'd been through had kind of taken that away from me a little bit. And I knew that human connection was vitally important for me to be able to overcome and process the things that I did as the start point, I think, for me to start this healing journey. And that's exactly what it did. So I think for me, the stranger element to it was, I believe in this. I believe in human beings and the capacity that we have to be kind to one another. I just needed to be able to test that out and reaffirm what I already believed in, because I'd started to lose a bit of hope with it. I'd started this movement of kindness. It was going well. I believed in it, but the world and experiences kept trying to prove me wrong, I felt. I was like, bugger it, I'll just see how I go and test it out.
It's a bit of a dare as well. Like, I dare you to take care of me, for this time. And you received kindness along the way. You received hospitality. You received a supportive reception. But with all human connection, it's never one way, right? So how did you come to view the exchange? And what was the exchange with the strangers that took care of you and that you met?
Yeah, it was interesting. So sort of how I did this, I guess, the logistic element to that, in case anyone's wondering. I just put a post up on social media. It was me holding a toothbrush, and I said, look, on this date, at this time, I'm leaving my home with nothing but the clothes on my back. Can anyone help me? In a nutshell, there's a bit more to it. And all these people started sharing it on social media. Channel 7 picked it up. It was on mainstream news. It reached news stations all around the world. So suddenly, when I had that media infiltration, I started hearing from people all around the world. In fact, 10,000 of them reached out. And then I had a team of friends come over and they were helping me categorise, right, from Canberra. Canberra's over there by the lounge. Sydney's over here by the door. Queensland's here. I'm not an organised person whatsoever. And logistics and planning is not a strength of mine. So I had friends helping me map that out. And it all got very difficult. And I was like, I don't even know how to piece this together, because I'm going to offer here on this day and offer here on this day. And then I just went with my gut. I said, you know what? There's people who are sharing as part of their offer their backstory and what's made them reach out in the first place. And I started going, well, they sound special. I might pick that one and then I'll make the rest work. And then I guess a lot of people think I'm unlucky because of my life experiences, but I'd say I'm pretty lucky. So I said, I'll just go with that, and that. And then I had like a luxurious limousine company reach out in Sydney and said, while you're in Sydney, we'll drive you from A to B. I was like, sure, that'll be great. So here I am practically living on the streets, being driven by a limousine driver with my head out the rooftop, thinking I was a Hollywood movie star or something like that. So the privilege isn't lost on me, but why I picked the special ones was they was sharing I guess, pieces of adversity. And I realised that this journey would be powerful for not only me, but for the people that were helping me, because I think kindness can be obviously multifaceted, the giver, the receiver, and there's an experience going on that is parallel to each other a lot of the time when you're experiencing some form of kindness. And all of the people that reached out that shared me one of their stories were giving me that perspective just simply by reading them. And so that's why I picked each of them to go to. And that taught me about adversity in a different light. You know, I'm someone who's perceived to have gone through a lot, but that doesn't mean that everyone sitting in this room hasn't suffered or endured in some way, and that's something that's not lost on me whatsoever. And so by sharing my own story with them, it almost gave others permission to do the same, to share back, and to I guess, experience in that hardship and the growth that comes from that as well. And for them, I think they just saw a person who was in need, but also that they could potentially assist, not just through accommodating or transporting or feeding or whatever it may have been, but also through telling of their own story. And I think that's, I mean, I don't think anyone in this room will be here if they didn't believe in the power of storytelling. It's a writing festival, it's about books, it's, you know, so that can be so powerful, and that really has informed a lot of the work that Kindness Factory now actually does from a resilience standpoint. And so forth. So not only did it help me in the moment, but it's helped inform a lot of the decision making, even at a strategic and board level for the business that I run. So it's pretty powerful, yeah.
So I'm relieved to, if your parents are really happy to know you prioritise dental hygiene as well. Yeah. So you had a toothbrush, a GPS tracker, and a backpack full of stories.
Yeah.
Sounds like, was it, I mean, you were struggling with your own story really at the time. Like you were trying to process it. You were seeking support, connection. Was listening to other people's stories or taking on their journeys, their adversity, as you put it, almost easier than dealing with yours?
It was, and it was a welcome distraction to me as well, because I think, you know, my life had been thrust I remember after having broken my back for the first time, and then losing my partner, and then starting a kindness movement, that was media worthy enough. And media would often tell my story, sometimes with my permission, sometimes without it. To then go on and have your back broken again and be in rehab and hospitals and comas and things like that, it was sort of this story that got put out there that I had no control of the narrative. And so it almost got, my story was almost thrown to me. I had to catch it and then digest it and go, is this how I believe my story? Is this what I believe my story to be, or is this just what's being told to me? And there were so many different elements to my own story that I was like, well, that's not even interesting. This is way more interesting from a growth perspective and all those sorts of things. To then learn of others' stories, that was just refreshing for me, because I was so sick of hearing. And the way I was even introduced, it was like, oh, this is Kath, she's broken her back twice and she's the most unluckiest person in Australia and things like that. And it's like, no, I'm also an auntie. Like, I'm a very proud auntie, and I'd love to be identified with that rather than, and I have a great job in sport. This was sort of, 6 years ago. To even be introduced as a motivational speaker, that's odd. Someone called me an author the other day and I disagreed with them, and they're like, but you've got a book. And I was like, I do too. Yeah, I guess I'm an author. So you often get thrown these different things that you are, I guess, with a unique life like mine. So to listen to other people's journey, life experiences, was so powerful. And that's my favourite part about writing the book, was being, I guess, afforded the opportunity to share their story in parallel with my own. And what they taught me along the way was so powerful. And when I was approached to write the book, even, the first idea of it could be, well, just tell your story in chronological order or however it worked. And it was not something that appealed to me, because I felt there was so much more that I could give and teach people through reading of a book, rather than just a regurgitation of trauma and loss and overcoming adversity and things like that as well. So they taught me more than going through my own trauma, loss, etc. Yeah.
So you also, this relationship with your story, I'm really interested in, right? Like, I come from a minority community, and I have lots of friends who are maybe refugees or have stories of hardship or adversity where it's unique in society. And I feel people with that experience often asked for their story in a way that they don't necessarily consent to, or, for example, some friends of mine who are refugees, when they run an NGO, and when they're applying for grant money, for example, they're asked to share their personal story. And they're like, no, I run an NGO, I'm not selling, this is not what I'm doing. But now you've built a career around the telling of your story. You've come from this moment of extreme difficulty, of processing it, of having those interpersonal sharings of story. You shared it on media in these pithy 1 minutes. And how has your relationship to telling it changed over time? How do you view it now? Yeah,
I'm a very accidental speaker and storyteller, very accidental. I say that, it's really funny. My Year 12 English teacher, who I'm quite close with now, she actually failed me in my writing and oral exams. Now I'm a published author and a motivational speaker, so I sure showed her, hey. So it was really funny. She's amazing. She was actually my favourite teacher, not because I was good at English, but it's because she cared about me, and that's what I always share with teachers. It's really important to show up for your students in that way, and teachers are heroes. But how I got into the telling of my story and actually even consenting to having it out there was more, she invited me back to my high school on International Women's Day, and she said, can you just come? The kids they love your story, they know you're an ex-student. And I said, yes, of course, but what shall I talk about? She said, here's an idea, how about your life? And I said, okay, that would be a good start point, I guess. So I did that, and the principal of that school, his brother headed up Seek Employment, so a big employment firm, and he said, that was fantastic. My brother wants you to come and speak at his workplace. And I said, he said, what's your fee? And I said, well, I'm not a speaker, I don't have a fee, I've got a great job. And anyway, one thing led to another. I ended up doing that, and then had all these agencies from around the world wanting me to speak in various different places. And I quickly had to learn about myself. Is that something that I want to do, or is that, is it just because people are telling me that I should do that because I might be good at it, or I don't know, authentic in storytelling, or whatever that may be? And the answer was initially no. I didn't set out to be a speaker or an author or anything like that. I am actually quite an introverted person. A lot of people think that I'm an extrovert because of the job and the career that I've chosen, but no. After this, my partner, who's up the back, will probably go up the coast, and I'll be staring at a wall for about 5 hours straight. That's just how I recharge and do things like that. But it very quickly became apparent to me that something important to me from a purpose perspective in life. My brothers are all tradies, and so they go to work and they might start a project. It could be a backyard blitz, or actually a good analogy. One of my best friends moved house recently. It was during COVID, and had a very outdated and run-down backyard. And I live within the 5K radius, and she said, do you want to come and do a working bee in the backyard? And I said, yeah, sure, I'd love to do that. So I get there on the Saturday morning, had a look. It was like a concrete jungle, spiders and weeds and stuff everywhere. And we got to task for the entire weekend, Saturday, Sunday. At the end of the Sunday, I had a look, and you could see progress. And I was like, that's actually so rewarding for me, because normally 9-to-5 job, all that kind of stuff, you're behind a computer, you actually don't see the progress. And I was like, that's a really cool thing to be able to see, like, the fruits of your labour. And I very quickly realised that that's what speaking became for me. When I'm doing the charity work that I do, or running an organisation or a business that I do, it's almost behind a computer or on the phone or something like that, and you don't get to see the progress. When I'm on stage speaking to thousands of people, you might see that light bulb go on for some person that goes, you know what, I want to change, I want to grow, I want to be kind, I want to be this, and you get that interaction afterwards where someone comes up and wants to share part of their story. And for me, that's like the backyard project that I did. I get to see it in the moment, and I get to see progress. That one person might change their way of thinking, or dare to overcome the adversity that it is that they're facing, and things like that. So, yeah, the storytelling became a vehicle for me to be able to achieve that. And I very quickly learnt to get outside of my comfort zone with it, and now it just sort of comes naturally, where it's not something I have to overthink, I can just do, and it's quite natural. But I absolutely had to work on being comfortable with my own narrative around that and how I put it out there, for sure.
Yeah, cool. And I think, you failed English, now you're an author.
Mrs. Bromhead, if anyone wants to know her name, yeah.
Teaching's lifelong, so is learning. These traumatic events and these things that happened in your life, they did change you.
Yeah.
But some things are the same, right? You have always been unbelievably committed to what you're doing.
Yeah.
You've always had big dreams. And I think from my experience and my what I've observed, part of traumatic recovery is recognizing that although you may have lost one dream or a path or a future, there are whole other aspects to your life that you then raise up, that then can fill that space. And as someone who's extremely committed with big dreams, what do your dreams look like now?
Yeah, it's an incredible question. And it's a very boring answer, I'm afraid. Everyone knows that word, balance. It's something that I'm striving for. So I've just touched down from LA. I speak all around the world. That's really exciting. But I think for me in the future, it's more about, it's about friendship is so important to me. Love is really important to me. Family is incredibly important to me. But so is my career as well. And so how do I, maintain all of those things? Because I think if I'm not doing all of those things, then I'm probably not going to be as happy as I could be. So it's finding balance in the future. Our mission at Kindness Factory is to make the world a kinder place. I don't think we'll achieve that. I'm sure we're making it kinder every day, but, really the mission should be we don't have to exist because the world is operating with a sense of kindness and belonging and all of those sorts of things. So I don't think the job will ever be over in that regard, but for me personally, it's about maintaining health. It's about having love in my life. It's about a family eventually. It's about all those sorts of things as well. So they're the dreams now. They're the really simple stuff, but the things that really matter to an individual as well.
I don't think that's boring at all. I think that's really healthy, and I didn't really want to make it about myself, but I also had a severe spinal injury and a difficult recovery, and there was a time where filling my life up proved to myself that I was over it, or filling my life up or consuming myself was like, oh, I'm still going, but I wasn't. I was running, and there's a balance. Is another level of recovery. It's another level of living, and something that has less sort of public kind of affirmation to it, but a lot more internal peace, I think. And I think achieving balance is a lifelong practice that we all kind of need to aspire to, and it probably doesn't sell books. Do you know what I mean? It's happy or something. There's something that you feel, and maybe it radiates out of you, but it's a different type of reward, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think at any given time, the bar is always changing. So 4 years ago, it was about speaking more, getting on stages, potentially writing a book, all those sorts of things. And the more that I've come to learn and grow up, and the experiences that we've both been through, for me, I wouldn't change my experiences for anything. I honestly wouldn't, and that's sometimes a hard reality for people to wrap their head around. But it's taught me more about myself and given me a greater acceptance of myself and my abilities and my disabilities and my strengths and my weaknesses and my vulnerabilities and all that kind of stuff. And I guess I've come to learn that no one is perfect, myself included. I am far from perfect. My family have a joke. My partner up the back, his name's Mike, and whenever I'm talking to my family, they're like, poor Mike, for whatever it is that I'm up to. And so it's interesting that the most rewarding things are probably the things that happen behind closed doors, be it at home, in a rehab environment, in recovery, whatever it is, not the ones that are publicised or put out there in a book or anything like that.
And I think there's something about self-acceptance that enables you to enables self-love and care of oneself. And so, I think where I was going, I think taking care of oneself and loving oneself, even though that running fast, that winning the race doesn't necessarily happen, it's better that it doesn't, and other things arise. You know, like when I sort of slow down, my creativity really grows.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, okay, maybe I'm not going to write that hard-hitting non-fiction takedown of some industry, but I'm going to write a playful novel. That's,
Sure.
do you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
feel like another part of you that is allowed to breathe.
Fully agree with that. And I guess when you have a life that is more in the public eye than not, or has been put out there and things like that, people probably think that you're hugely successful and everyone says yes and every opportunity comes your way. I reckon I've got way more knockbacks than I have, successful pieces of, any instances in life. So I genuinely believe when you get a no or you get a knockback or something like that, it's because you're on a different path or you're supposed to go down a different path, and life just comes the way it needs to. And I think I have to believe that, but it's a nice way for me to be able to conceptualise what my life is as well.
Yeah, and traumatic experience it can accelerate personal growth, right?
100%.
And you can look back and go, okay, in psychology we can say, we write our own stories to gain that acceptance. That did give me that personal growth. Therefore, but also it's so rewarding.
Yeah.
Right.
A common question. So the book is made up of 14 chapters, a sort of an opening and a summary, or an introduction and a summary, and then there's 12 chapters in the middle, which are themes. So there are 12 attributes of kindness, and they make up a kindness curriculum that exists in 3,000 Australian schools. So it's things like trust and honesty and humility and so forth, empathy, gratitude, etc. One of those being self-acceptance. And a lot of people, certainly in the school space, often ask me, out of all of the 12 attributes of kindness that your curriculum teaches, and in corporates and everywhere else that it goes, what's the most important? And I used to always say they're all important. They're all important when you add them together. They equal this, and resilience and well-being and kindness. And then someone said, you can't cheat. You've got to give a proper answer. And it is self-acceptance, in my view. Because without self-acceptance, we don't have self-awareness. And I think self-awareness is often the first step in taking that we need to have for any good life, really, understanding who we are, because we are so incredibly beautiful and unique in our own right. And if we consider this, the world's made up of nearly 8 billion people. If we're all the same, it'd be very, very boring, in my opinion. So I think we need to celebrate our own uniqueness and our own strengths and weaknesses and what makes us us in comparison to the people sitting next to us and so forth. And when we have that self-awareness, we can accept ourselves, and when we can accept ourselves, we can then move into empathy and gratitude and compassion and so forth. And so that's why I think it's vitally important.
Yeah, and there's also this concept which, for me, I don't bring up a lot. I feel like you have to earn this conversation, and I feel like you have to bring wisdom to this conversation, because people will grab onto it thinking that something is rosy, or they want to bring a positive spin to something that was extraordinarily difficult, and you don't want people to forget how difficult it was. And that's this concept which was introduced to me in something interview I was listening to, and it just came to me at the right time. It was someone who experienced a lot of adversity, like yourself, and he described it as a type of post-traumatic enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And it's a big word, but at that time I just felt my whole body just like, yeah. But you have to earn it. It's like you've got to walk through hell to get there. But there is a slightly elevated plane there waiting, in a way.
Absolutely, and I don't want to speak for anyone everyone's suffered in some way an adversity in their life. For me, my adversities pushed me to parts of myself that I don't think I would ever have had to explore if I hadn't have gone through them, especially at such a young age. And that's why that word I've always heard the concept of post-traumatic growth. So you can go through PTSD, and then you can have a post-traumatic growth experience if you are able to process that and work through it, and hurt. Like it hurts to have to process some of these events and these experiences, but at the end of it comes a beautiful word, which I'm glad that you said that, which is enlightenment. It gives you a greater understanding and a growth opportunity as well.
So we've got these lofty concepts somewhere in this world that is able to churn lofty concepts into to digest it and excrete something else is social media, right?
Yeah.
So like social media is a big part of your outreach. You've really been like successful in that forum, I'd say, and you've managed to use it to drive human connection. But it's also a place that that I remember sort of going to, especially when you're in recovery, you're sort of tired. I remember like scrolling the internet and being like, there's so much social comparison here.
Yeah.
Like this is what my friends are doing, and they're sharing all these like life milestones and things, and I'm trying really hard to brush my teeth without spilling toothpaste down my front. And how do you look after your perspective in that forum that isn't always conducive to care?
Yeah, I mean, even the way that I spent a lot of time in the US talking to very big companies who specialise in social media, and we understand the way that it's all set up at the back end is the more you're looking at, the more it will feed you. So if you're looking at toxic information or controversial news and all those sorts of things and spending too much time on it, it will keep feeding you that news. So for kids, that's hugely problematic, of course, because we talk about clickbait and all that kind of stuff. I remember after my second broken back, probably similar to what you were just saying, I'm lying in a hospital bed and starting to feel pretty sorry for myself. Couldn't move my legs, couldn't feel my legs. It's life in a wheelchair prognosis, all these sorts of things. And then I'm looking at my Instagram and social media feeds, and people my age are getting married, they're having kids, they're buying houses. I can't even go to the bathroom by myself. So that comparison starts to creep in. For me at that point, I just had to try and switch it off. Be happy for my friends, of course, but also say, just pardon me while I tap out for a minute and focus on my recovery. Thankfully for me, I run a kindness movement, so my algorithms are all pretty positive. I get lots of kindness things keep showing up, which is great for my mental health, but for others around me, not so much. So when they follow our page and things like that, hopefully that algorithm starts to improve for them. But even now, with all the positivity that comes through my feed, I've got a thing on my phone. There's a tool that you can get. I think it costs you $3 a year, and it locks me out of my social media if I've spent half an hour on it in the day, just because I've got quite an addictive personality, and if I just get caught scrolling, I'm less focused on the people around me, the people I love that I want to spend time and give my attention to. And my work and everything else that entails that. So there's little tips and tricks that I use to try and get out of that social media thing, even though it's been a huge... I mean, there's good and bad in everything.
And you are also like a competitive person. You're a professional sports person. I think you've got that in you. Was there some liberation in a way from that kind of competition or that competitive streak?
This is another thing about me that interests people. I am a competitive person, but only with myself. So if I go for a run and it takes me 5 minutes, the next day I'll need to be 4 minutes and 15, otherwise I'll be disappointed in myself. As a cricketer, a professional athlete, I actually wasn't that competitive. I remember when you'd be vying for the one spot that was left to fill in the team, and my teammate would get it over me, for example, and I'd just be happy for them. Happy for her, all that kind of stuff, and kept thinking my time would come. So I'm always happy to let others win ahead of me, but when it comes to myself, I'm very competitive. So I need to be better than I was yesterday and striving for, better all the time. So that's a little bit of a different...
So in the way that you felt you were channeling your stubbornness, you sort of like push it towards a direction that's positive for everybody.
Yeah.
I just want to finish on a little bit of a challenge. What are the limits of kindness?
Yeah, this is a great question. We're in the world of toxic positivity and things like that. what I always say is certainly to a lot of, the service workers and teachers and really for that matter anyone, when it comes to the concept of kindness, it's so powerful, and I genuinely believe that it will change the world and all those sorts of things. But the most important part to considering kindness is kindness to yourself. Whenever we get onto a plane, the first message we hear is the safety drill. In case of an emergency, oxygen mask will fall down from the ceiling. You need to put yours on first before helping others. I'm not a mum. I'd love to be one day. I'm an auntie. If my nephew was sitting next to me, I used to think there's absolutely no way that I would put on my mask before his. Going through life the way that I have and learning the things that I have, I've realised that it actually is the most important thing that we can do. And that's not to say that we're in crisis, but every single day I think we need to consider what it is that we need in life, because we cannot help others unless we've helped ourselves, and we cannot be kind to others, true kindness, if we're not kind to ourselves first. And that's an individual thing. For me, it's going for a run or a swim, or telling my partner that I love them, or taking a dog for a walk. Whatever it is, it's going to be different for every single person in the room, but you can't fill from an empty cup. You need to really fill yours first before giving kindness to others. So I think a lot of people consider kindness to be selfless. Sometimes it has to be selfish as well, and there's nothing wrong with that word selfish. It gets a lot of bad raps, but we need to be selfish before we can be selfless, in my view. And so that's the limit I would give to kindness. Outside of that, I think kindness is limitless. We can't be too kind to ourselves or others. It's an incredible way to live, and once we adopt the energies of kindness and everything that it can be, I think that's a very good recipe for a good life, in my view anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna turn to the audience now and go for questions. We've got about 10 minutes. I had to borrow Kath's watch because I've got about 10 minutes left. So I'd like to invite everyone in the audience to ask a question. Just note, Kath's come to the audience today with extraordinary respect. We ask that you return that to her. Also, if you are someone who always asks questions, or if you're someone who's never asked a question before, I hope you find the courage. If you ask lots of questions, demonstrate your experience and abilities by please making it a question and not a statement. Thank you. You're so keen. I can see that.
Well, there's a bit of a backstory why I'm so keen. Thank you, Kath.
You're welcome.
You were our Australia Day ambassador at Mossman, and I was sick, and
wow.
I didn't hear you. So it's delightful to come and hear you speak today.
Thanks for coming.
No, wonderful. The question's very simple. You travel the world and speak. Is kindness the same all around the world? And are the questions that people ask very similar? And sorry, I don't think I said my name's Carolyn.
Nice to meet you, Carol.
Thanks, Kath.
Thanks for the question. It's a good question because it's actually something that I would love to study from a sort of social science perspective. What does kindness look like in different cultures and all those sorts of things? I think the answer is yes and no on both fronts. Well, the question's, for the most part, pretty similar. So it's about, how do you adopt a mindset to overcome? And then you get some really interesting ones thrown in there as well. Culturally, this is a really interesting one. I spend a lot of time in the US, have lived there, speaking professionally, all that kind of stuff. I think in Australia we suffer a lot from tall poppy syndrome. So I don't think we are less kind than people in America, for example, but we are less inclined to share that out of fear of getting cut down. Or is it an act of kindness if I share it with people? And being a country kid from regional New South Wales, I was probably one of them 10 years ago. I've been a decent kid all my life and person and adult, but I don't need to promote that anywhere and all that kind of stuff. And I quickly learnt that kindness inspires kindness. So think about the last time you gave or received kindness or even witnessed it in action from afar, someone helping another person, gives you that really warm feeling in your body, and then you're like, I want to do something good now for someone, or I want to experience that. In America, and Kindness Factory was way more of a success in America before it was Australia, because if they do something kind and you give them permission, they're going to share that with the world. They are not going to hold back. It's just how they are culturally, and that's wonderful. And there's so many great things about Australia and the US, and anywhere you go in the world, there's so many incredible things about every culture that we can explore. But that's the one difference that I've noticed, is that we're not necessarily, more or less kind here in Australia, but we are less likely to share any of those experiences out of fear of someone going, well, big whoop, or good on you, or you didn't have to share that with someone, or you're an idiot, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And I've got 3 older brothers, so I experience it all the time. But that's probably the one thing I've noticed. And then I remember actually in the UK, I've lived there before as a professional cricketer, and I had heaps of friends there, and we're registered as a company there as well. And before it was registered, they're like, oh, would you consider bringing it here? Oh, I'm not sure yet, lots to consider. And they're like, I don't think it'll be much of a success. And I'd say, well, why not? If someone come up to me and I was filling my car up with petrol and they told me they were going to pay for it, I would call the police. So for them, it was like they're very cynical if people come up to them and things like that. So I guess there's just ways of being that are ingrained within us that make us the way that we are from where we've been brought up and things like that as well. But there are certainly a lot of differences in terms of the questions I get. Mostly it's and I get a lot of personal questions. So there's a group forum, and then a lot of people come up and want to connect and share their story, and I love that. It's a privilege I don't take lightly. Most common ones are, if you can't feel your leg, how do you walk? How did you... Everyone asks about my dad when I share those anecdotes about him and things like that, my family, my upbringing, the adversities that I've suffered and things like that as well. So those questions are pretty uniform wherever I go.
Whoever printed that poster.
Yeah. Hello?
Hi. I'm interested in the sort of almost religious aspect. You're preaching this like somebody would say who was a Buddhist or a Christian. Did you have a religious upbringing? And secondly, did you have some sort of near-death experience? Because you've kind of so committed to, what seems to be your personal mission.
Yeah, I was brought up, my mum was Catholic, or is Catholic, so I was brought up, I was baptised, went through the ceremonial communion, confirmation, but not at all religious. I'm not attached to any kind of religion right now. A lot of people assume that I am because of the kindness message and things like that. Why kindness? It's got no attachment to religion or anything like that. I guess it's become its own religion in its own right within my life and that context. Why kindness is another question, because again, they say trauma, grief, loss, adversity, it doesn't equal kindness, and I just argue so much with that. For reasons like I said, you're in a wheelchair, you can't reach a lift button, someone sees that, they press it, it means nothing to there, everything to yours. When I broke my back for the first time, this was a really beautiful story to come out of that. A series of unfortunate events after one of my surgeries led me to come within about 3 hours of having my leg amputated. And throughout that, I was in the struggle of my life. I was fighting to keep this leg attached, and I had to be in a gym a lot of the time, getting it moving and all those sorts of things. And I was there at 2 o'clock in the morning at the Sydney Cricket Ground. I had a 24-hour access pass. I got there at 2 o'clock, parked my car, I was in crutches, crutched myself into the gym, turned the lights on. It's manned 24 hours a day by security. So they come rushing on in thinking I'm an intruder, stealing something or something like that. And they stop at the gates and they say, Kath, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, I know, but I'm in the fight of my life to keep my leg attached, all these sorts of things. And there's an older security guard, Bobby, who was always on that night shift in that 2-week period that I was going there. And he went back to his post and he comes back 5 minutes later, he's got a roll of electrical tape. I thought, what's he doing with this? And he said, look, mate, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, but what if I strap your leg into the spin bike or the cross trainer? I've got to go back to my post to make sure I'm doing my job. I'll come back in 45 minutes, I'll unstrap you and I'll put you into the next machine. And he was right, he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't an expert, he wasn't a medical practitioner, he was just a man who cared. And those were the moments when I was in that growth phase that we spoke about, of the traumatic experiences, that I looked back on and went, was there anything good, bad, ugly, no judgment in my thought process here that stands out to me the most? And it was always kindness because of those reasons. That moment in that gym it doesn't sound like much, but it gave me the tiny slither of hope that I needed to do what I needed to do to keep my leg attached, for example. And it wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for his help and things like that. So that's why I believe in the transformative impact of it. And probably to Kaya's point, I am committed. When I take something on, I take it on 100%. I don't sort of leave any stones unturned or anything like that. And do you know what? It's just a good way to live as well. Like, it's hard for me to have a bad day. It really is. Like, if I'm not out there speaking or being kind or to myself or others, I'm hearing from hundreds of people around the world who are doing that. So when you're reading this constant reinforcement of a message of kindness or goodwill or hope or resilience or whatever it is, it's hard to be sort of stuck in a slump. That's not to say I don't have bad days, I absolutely do, but it's a lot harder when you're surrounded by kindness, I believe. So that's where the commitment to it comes from. It's not a divine belief in any kind of religion or anything, but just more a divine belief in kindness. Thank you for the question, though.
I'm not sure everyone would see being taped to an exercise bike for 45 minutes as kindness, but...
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Rayleigh.
Nice to
Just
meet
a
you.
quick question on... I'm quite interested in that you've been going overseas and into corporates.
Yeah.
And, corporates a little, it's quite competitive and, there's a lot of, it's a bit of a... it's a very competitive nature, and so I'm interested to understand how it's translating in the corporate world because, I think it's fantastic. I'd love to see organisations adopt it, but I'm sceptical.
Yeah. As I mentioned, I'm an accidental speaker. It's just a unique story that I tell in my own way. And when I'm headlined, we've got an inspirational speaker coming in and she's from Australia and she's going to talk about kindness. I get, oh, God. And then at the end of it, they're like, tell me more, give me more, come back in, when are you coming in next week, all that kind of stuff. How I cracked the international market, it's a very funny story that my parents hate me telling, so I'll tell it. Accidental speaker in 2017, I got a phone call from an American woman by the name of Sammy, who I believed worked here in Australia. And she said, look, we heard you got an amazing story. We want you to headline our whole event and open it. And I said, great, where will it be, Sammy? And she said, it's in Ojai in California. And in my head, I'm doing cartwheels going, I've never spoken. I've only been speaking in Australia for a year. Why would I go overseas? And she said, look, here's your fee. I said, look, Sammy, do you mind me asking what's this all about? And she said, oh, I'm sure you've heard of us. We bring together the world's most powerful and influential people and brands. And in my head, I was like, this sounds like a cult. I really don't know about this. And she's like, it was very elitist. And I said, I don't know, Sammy. And she said, look, you and your assistant, first-class flights. And I didn't have an assistant at the time, so my best friend then convinced me that she needed to come. And we're doing sporting events, all this kind of stuff. And we get there, and the briefing, so you do a briefing when you do a talk. And I said, how long have I got for this talk? And she said, you've got 8 minutes. I said, 8 minutes? I normally get 45. Could I at least have 15? And she said to me, look, the Dalai Lama's getting 12. You've got 8. And I thought she was joking. I honestly did. And I was like, what a way to make a point. All right, 8 will do. So get there the day before, having a sound check, all that kind of stuff. And I started freaking out because I saw there's going to be 4,000 seats there. Screens are bigger than any house I've ever lived in. And I was like, I think I need to start taking this a bit more serious. And I rang my best friend, who's now sunning herself on the pool deck, and I said, you need to come help me, I need to prepare for this. And the next day I got there, I was pretty excited, a bit nervous, and music's blaring, and I'm in the green room. And I was eating the muffins and doing all the things that you're not supposed to do before a talk, and a security cartel walks in. And I thought, I honestly just thought I was in trouble. I was like, what have I done here? And at the end of the security cartel was a very stunning looking black American woman, and I said, g'day. In my head I was like, she looks really familiar. And I said, g'day, I'm Kath, and put my hand out, and security guards are slapping my hand away, and she said, g'day, hi Kath, I'm Michelle, it's lovely to meet you. And I said, wow. And in my head I kept thinking she just looks so familiar. And she was looking at me curiously because I'm saying, would you like a muffin? And no, I'm good. And she says, Kath, do you mind me asking, what are you doing back here? I said, I'm I'm speaking today, Michelle. I'm so excited. I can't wait. And she said, wow, what are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to talk about kindness. And she said, well, that's my favourite thing. And I said, oh, that's lovely. And then I said, what are you doing? And she said, I'm speaking today too. I'm number 2. I must be after you. And I said, wow, what are you going to talk about? And she said, I'm going to talk about the Me Too movement. I said, I've heard about that. She said, I'm pretty sure you would have. I said, okay. And then she kept looking at me curious, and she said, Kath, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to leave you here. I really think I need to listen to what you've got to say. I'm going to run around the front and watch. And I said, yeah, fantastic. As soon as I've finished, I'll do the same. And I go out on stage, and I'm 2 minutes into the 8. Everything's on track. Hadn't sworn yet or anything like that. And I look off stage, off centre to the right, and it suddenly dawned on me who was backstage with me, because she sat next to her husband, Barack Obama. And very quickly nearly lost track of my whole talk. Did swear, and then finished the talk, got a standing ovation. Everyone was surrounding me, but I quickly beelined for her to apologise and say, I'm so sorry of course I know who you are. I was just very nervous and all those sorts of things. So that lended itself to then being introduced to corporate America. So, Warner Media, AT&T, all that kind of stuff. And that really sort of catapulted my speaking career. But to answer your question, kindness gives people a competitive edge, and that's what corporates and CEOs are starting to. It gives you better employee retention if you can adopt a kindness culture. Better employee engagement, less sick days. When we're in a kind and safe enough environment, we work better. We're more, as I said, engaged and all those sorts of things. And so from an investment standpoint, to be working with a kind culture actually saves companies a lot of money in the long run, because it's better mental health outcomes, well-being, resilience, etc. So that's how we sort of pitch ourselves in, and that's how it tends to work. And people just love doing it, to be honest, yeah.
So kindness is also labour law.
Yeah,
right?
Kindness is...
It's also labour.
Yeah.
So that's why they love us Australians. We're just so down to earth. Anyway, we've got the Dalai Lama coming next, so we've got to wrap up. We're going to give a round of applause for Kath.
Thanks. Bye-bye.